Why was everyone whispering the moment she walked in? Maybe it was the glasses, or the way she held the papers calm, almost fragile, in a place that worshipped noise and muscle. Whatever it was, the Navy SEAL candidates inside Coronado's warfare classroom had already decided one thing: she didn't belong. Whispers rippled through the room like static before a storm. A few smirks, a muffled laugh. Someone muttered, "Cute professor, wrong building." Even their leader, Merrick Davenport, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying that effortless command of someone born to be obeyed, leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a quiet scoff tugging at his mouth. No one expected her to last a day. The air inside the Naval Special Warfare Training Command smelled of salt water and sweat, the scent of the ocean they were pushed into every morning until their lungs burned, until their bodies forgot where pain ended and pride began. They were warriors in the making. And this woman looked like she belonged at a university lectern, not here. Her name was Dr. Elaine Thorne, petite, auburn hair pulled tight into a bun, khakis pressed to perfection, a thin chain around her wrist, silver, dull but worn smooth like it had been there a long time. When training officer River announced she'd be leading 4 hours a week of asymmetric warfare theory, the room's reaction was immediate. Groans. A few quiet chuckles. Davenport's smirk widened. 4 hours of theory, in a place built to crush weakness. But Dr. Thorne didn't flinch. She arranged her notes neatly, waited for the noise to settle, and then spoke in a voice so calm it somehow cut through the room. "Gentlemen," she said, "the enemy adapts faster than you think, so should you." Silence. Then Davenport rose halfway from his seat, his tone respectful but sharp enough to draw blood. "With respect, ma'am, the enemy doesn't care about theory when bullets are flying." A few nods around him. Someone snorted agreement. Her eyes, pale gray, unblinking, met his. "Show me," she said. A pause. He frowned. "Show you what?" "Your room-clearing procedure." He hesitated, caught off guard by the request, but pride carried him forward. Within seconds he'd moved through the mock room, swift, efficient, textbook perfect. When he finished, she gave a small nod. "Textbook indeed," she murmured. "Now, let me show you the 7 fatal flaws in your approach." She took the marker, drew on the whiteboard with surgical precision, angles, blind spots, lines of fire. 10 minutes later, the room that had been chuckling moments ago sat silent. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't moved an inch closer. But she had dismantled Davenport's confidence, piece by piece, with nothing more than observation. The lesson ended without applause, without comment. Only a tension left hanging, confusion, irritation, and the faintest spark of respect. And yet no one missed the scar. When her sleeve slipped, a pale line ran around her wrist, jagged and uneven, the kind left by something sharp, something deliberate. She adjusted her cuff quickly, but not before one recruit, Calloway, noticed. It wasn't a paper-cut kind of scar. It was the kind that came from surviving something. Days turned into weeks. The professor kept coming back. Every time the men expected her to fold under their silence, she didn't. Every time Davenport tried to corner her in debate, she answered with facts so brutal they left the room speechless. Her lessons weren't about memorizing doctrine. They were about perception, the invisible traps the mind set under stress, anchoring bias, overconfidence, tunnel vision. She showed them that strength without thought was a liability. But the recruits weren't ready to hear that. "We need to be stronger, faster, more aggressive," Davenport muttered one morning, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's what keeps us alive." Her reply was soft, almost gentle. "The strongest operator I ever knew died because he couldn't adapt." That sentence, "the strongest operator I ever knew," changed the air in the room. The way she said it, it wasn't theory, it was memory. Calloway glanced at her hands again, steady, composed, But there it was, a tiny tremor in her thumb, like something beneath the calm was shaking loose. She moved on quickly, diving into her next exercise: sensory manipulation drills. The recruits strapped on headsets that distorted sound and light, simulating disorientation in combat. The first minutes were chaos. Even their best candidates stumbled, panicked, lost rhythm. Davenport slammed his headset off, jaw tight. "This isn't training," he snapped. "It's nonsense." Thorne's voice turned to steel. "Ramadi, 2012, she said evenly. 3 operators dead because insurgents used these exact sensory tactics. Physical strength couldn't save them. Training like this would have." No one laughed after that. Still, resentment simmered. Pride had nowhere to go. Someone drew a cruel caricature of her on the board before class, a frail professor being carried by real soldiers. She erased it without a word. But the next lesson cut deeper. "This was designed to fail," she told them after another botched drill. "Because your bodies are strong but your minds are untrained. That changes now." Davenport exhaled sharply, frustration spilling over. "This is a waste of time." That was when she said it, the line that would echo through his mind for weeks. "In Kandahar, I watched a man die because he thought exactly like you. His muscles couldn't save him. His mind could have." The word "watched" froze the room. She said it too naturally, too specifically. Not like a researcher quoting a report, but like someone who had been there. No one dared ask. Not yet. But every man in that room suddenly wanted to know who she really was. By the 3rd week, the classroom felt like a pressure cooker. Not from physical drills, from the silence, the tension, the battle of egos and unspoken questions. She stood before the whiteboard again, dissecting Davenport's team's tactical simulation. Her voice, measured, surgical, pointed out every flaw. "Technically correct," she said, "but fatally flawed." Then she added something that turned the air to glass. "This maneuver cost 4 operators their lives. Fallujah, 2007. Davenport's patience cracked. "With all due respect, ma'am, this isn't something you learn from books. Those tactics were tested in combat by real operators." The marker clicked against the board once, sharp. "The Alisgari district's upper floors create crossfire zones. 7 seconds after breaching, your team would be dead. I know because I've seen it." Too specific again, too sure. Calloway saw her hand move unconsciously toward her ribs, a quick touch. A flinch maybe, the kind you do when memory hits a nerve. Then she described the first moments after a kill, time slowing, sound distorting, color sharpening. Her voice was calm, clinical, but the detail was too raw to be theoretical. "How would you know what it feels like to take a life?" Davenport's voice cut through the silence, hard and cold. Every eye turned to her. "Page 94 in your reading covers neurological combat stress," she said softly. "Let's continue." She didn't blink, didn't bite. But that refusal to engage, that serenity, was gasoline on Davenport's pride. When the class ended, the others filed out. He stayed. The door clicked shut. His boots echoed across the floor as he closed the distance. Every movement coiled with something darker than anger, humiliation maybe. "I think it's time we stop pretending," he said, voice low, knife-edge sharp. "You're teaching warfare to men who will actually fight while you've never seen combat. That makes you a liability." She stacked her papers neatly. "Your concern is noted." "No," he growled, stepping closer. "You don't get it. These men trust me. They'll follow me into combat, not you. Your theories undermine everything we've built." Her eyes lifted, calm, steady. "Leadership isn't about being the strongest in the room, Mr. Davenport. It's about knowing when strength isn't the answer." Something inside him snapped. In one motion, his hand shot forward, fingers closed around her throat. The papers scattered across the floor. Her back hit the wall with a dull thud. Gasps, recruits who hadn't fully left the hallway froze at the doorway, eyes wide. "This is combat, Professor," Davenport hissed. "This is what we're training for, threats, violence, not your theories." For one heartbeat, she didn't resist. Her eyes locked on his, cold, calculating. Then everything changed. It happened faster than sight could follow. A twist, a step, a movement like liquid steel. His arm bent the wrong way, a crack, a gasp, and the next thing anyone knew, the strongest man in the room was face down on the floor, his shoulder hanging at an impossible angle. She knelt above him, breathing steady, not triumphant, just calm. Footsteps thundered behind them. Commander Blackwood stepped through the door, his face unreadable. "At ease, Major," he said. The word hit the room like a grenade. "Major!" The recruits froze. Every whisper died in their throats. Thorne released. Davenport stood, adjusted her sleeve with quiet precision. Commander Blackwood's voice carried weight that made the walls themselves seem straighter. "Gentlemen," he said, "allow me to properly introduce your instructor. Major Elaine Thorne, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Call sign, Wraith. 15 years of operational experience. Silver Star, Purple Heart. Sole survivor of Operation Obsidian Shield." Silence, then realization. Every man in that room had heard the story whispered through training grounds, half classified, half legend. A mission that went black. An entire SEAL team lost. One survivor. No one had ever known her name. Until now. Davenport sat on the floor, breathing through pain and disbelief, eyes locked on the woman who had just broken him without breaking a sweat. Blackwood's voice softened only slightly. "You mocked the very tactics that saved lives across battlefields. Major Thorne's scars were earned where most of you will never walk. Learn from her, or you won't last." The recruits lowered their eyes. Pride collapsed into something heavier, respect and shame. Thorne adjusted her glasses, her calmness restored. "Class dismissed," she said simply. No one moved for several seconds. Then boots shuffled quietly out. Only Calloway lingered, standing by the door, eyes on the faint scars on her wrist, the proof of everything she'd never boasted about. The stories, the certainty, the silence, all of it finally made sense. Wraith wasn't an outsider. She was one of them. And maybe better than any of them. Why didn't she fight back sooner? That was the question echoing through every recruit's head the next morning. The training grounds were quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm that everyone survived but no one understands. Davenport was nowhere in sight. Commander Blackwood had suspended him pending review. Rumors swirled like ocean mist. Some said she broke his shoulder on purpose. Others said she could have done worse but chose not to. But the truth was simpler and harder to face. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. Elaine Thorne sat at her desk as if nothing had happened, papers stacked, lesson plan ready, calm, unshaken. The faint bruising on her throat was the only evidence of the violence that had unfolded. Calloway entered quietly, the first to arrive. He hesitated at the doorway before speaking. "Ma'am." She looked up, glasses catching the morning light. "Yes, Recruit Calloway. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened, for what everyone said." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Apologies are easy. Understanding is. Which one are you offering?" He swallowed, unsure how to answer. "Both, ma'am, I think." "Then start by understanding this. Strength isn't the absence of restraint. It's knowing when to hold it." He nodded slowly. Then she returned to her papers and the conversation was over. Outside, the recruits drilled in silence, their movements sharper now, more deliberate, as if afraid she might appear behind them at any moment, ready to dismantle their pride with nothing more than a glance. By sunset, Thorne was summoned to Commander Blackwood's office. The walls were lined with plaques, medals, and photos, faces of men who'd gone into darkness and never returned. He didn't look up when she entered. You could have neutralized him without injury. "Yes," she said simply. "But you didn't." "No." Blackwood leaned back, studying her with that expression only commanders have, one that carries both judgment and respect. "You knew this would happen." "I suspected," she admitted. "Men trained to solve everything with force don't respond well to ideas that challenge it." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You could have asked for protection." Her voice softened. "I don't need protection, Commander. I need them to learn." He finally met her eyes. "You made your point." "Not to him," she said. "Not yet." Later that evening, Thorne found herself walking the long, dim hallway toward the medical bay. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, sharp, sterile, cold. Davenport sat on the bed, his arm strapped in a sling, head bowed. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked small, human. She didn't knock, permission to enter. He looked up, startled. "Ma'am, I didn't expect." "That's clear." She pulled a chair close and sat. He shifted uncomfortably. "They're separating me, assaulting an instructor. My career's over." "Is that what you want?" she asked. He blinked, confused. "What I want doesn't matter. I crossed the line." She studied him quietly. "You did, but intention matters too." He frowned. "You're not serious. I attacked you." "You acted out of conviction," she said softly. "Misguided, reckless, but conviction nonetheless. You thought I was a civilian putting your men at risk. That instinct to protect, it's the foundation of leadership." He stared at her, eyes flicking between disbelief and shame. "Why didn't you fight me sooner?" Her gaze fell to her hands. "Because sometimes the best way to teach someone the weight of their actions is to let them feel it." He swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" "That depends on you," she said. "You can leave with your pride intact and your ignorance unchallenged, or you can stay and learn what true strength requires." He looked down at his injured shoulder. His voice broke just slightly. "I was wrong about you." She rose, collected her notes from the side table. "Be ready at 800. "Ma'am." "Training resumes." And with that she left. The next morning, the classroom wasn't the same. Every recruit stood straighter, quieter, eyes forward, no smirks, no jokes. Respect, real respect, had taken the place of mockery. Even Davenport, arm bound in a sling, stood at attention. "Seats," she ordered, voice steady. They sat. Not a single word was whispered. She walked to the board, but this time she didn't write. She just spoke. "You all think survival is about strength. It is. It's about adaptation. The battlefield doesn't care how much you can lift or how loud you can shout. It only cares how fast you can learn when everything goes wrong." A few heads nodded, quietly, almost involuntarily. "Some of you believe pain is the enemy. It is. Pain is a teacher. It strips away illusion. It leaves only truth." Her gaze lingered on Davenport. He didn't flinch. "For some of us," she continued softly, "pain is all that's left to remind us we survived." The silence was thick enough to choke on. No one moved. Finally, Calloway raised a hand. "Ma'am, is it true, what Commander Blackwood said, that you're the sole survivor of Operation Obsidian Shield?" Her expression didn't change. "Yes." "What happened?" She paused. The air seemed to still. "We were ambushed. 7 operators. 1 extraction point. They knew our patterns. They exploited our predictability. We fought until we couldn't. I carried out the mission because someone had to." No one spoke. No one even breathed. Calloway swallowed. "Your scars, ma'am, Kandahar. Torture, nerve damage, permanent," she said quietly, "but not fatal." Davenport exhaled slowly, the weight of every word sinking into him like lead. Then his voice, low, almost a whisper, cut through the silence. "You said the strongest operator you knew died because he couldn't adapt. Who was he?" Her eyes lifted, gray and sharp. but glimmering with something fragile beneath. "Your father," she said. The room froze. "Chief Garrett Davenport. He saved my life twice before losing his own, stronger than 10 of me. But when injury took that strength away, he couldn't adapt. That cost him everything." The color drained from Merrick's face. His jaw trembled. "My father." "Yes," she said softly, "and that's why I'm here, because I owe him more than survival. I owe him the lesson he never got to learn." No one dared move. Even Calloway bowed his head. Thorne turned back to the board, eyes distant. "Strength is not a legacy. Adaptation is." Outside, gulls cried over the bay, the sound of waves echoing faintly through the glass. Inside, every man sat in silence, knowing they had just witnessed something raw, not military, not procedural, human. The woman they had mocked was carrying ghosts they couldn't begin to comprehend. That evening, after lights out, Calloway found Davenport alone on the edge of the obstacle course. The night air was heavy with salt and quiet regret. "Couldn't sleep?" Calloway asked, sitting beside him. Davenport didn't look up. "She knew my father, trained with him, watched him die, and his voice cracked. I grabbed her throat." Calloway stared out at the moonlit water. "You couldn't have known." "That's not the point," Davenport said. "She was right. I relied on strength, always have. Thought leadership was about control. Turns out it's about humility." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the waves crash against the rocks. Finally, Davenport spoke again. "You ever wonder how someone like her still shows up every morning, after everything?" "Yeah," Calloway said quietly. "Maybe she teaches because that's the only way she can live with what happened." Davenport nodded. "Then maybe learning's the only way we can live with what we've done." At dawn, Thorne was already on the training field, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. The recruits jogged in formation toward her, cleaner lines, tighter focus, as if something invisible bound them together now. Not fear, not pride, respect. She didn't need to shout. One look was enough. The new phase of training began, one built not on muscle but on mind. They would fail again. They would stumble, curse, and break, but something fundamental had shifted. The classroom was no longer a battleground of egos. It was a forge. And Elaine Thorne, once dismissed as a professor, had become the fire. How do you rebuild trust after breaking someone? The question hung in Elaine Thorne's mind as she watched her recruits assemble at dawn. Their movements were sharper now, deliberate, the sloppiness of pride replaced by quiet discipline. But beneath that order, she could sense the tension, the aftermath of humiliation, the tremor of men still unsure how to face her. The sun bled slowly over the Pacific, staining the concrete training yard gold. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. She stood with her arms folded, clipboard under one arm, observing as they lined up 32 men, silent, sweat already streaking their faces. Davenport stood among them, arms still strapped in a sling, refusing to step aside despite his injury. Thorne's eyes swept the formation. "You are not here to become stronger," she said. "You are here to become smarter. Today we train the mind first." No one spoke, no one dared. She gestured toward the obstacle course, a network of ropes, walls, and tunnels stretching across the compound. It was a test every SEAL candidate could complete blindfolded. Except today, she'd changed something. They noticed it immediately. The arrangement wasn't the same. The course had been altered, angles changed, distances warped. "What's the catch?" someone muttered. "There's no catch," she said. "Only a question. Can you see what's in front of you when your mind expects something else?" The first team ran. Within minutes, they stumbled, wrong turns, collisions, confusion. The familiar had become hostile. By the time they crossed the finish line, they were panting, angry, humiliated. Davenport's jaw clenched as he watched. "You changed the course." "I changed nothing," she said. "You assumed too much." He glared at her. "That's the same thing." No, she said softly. That's the difference between surviving and dying. Her tone was calm, but her words landed like blows. Over the next week, she dismantled everything they thought they knew. Every exercise, every drill rewritten. She introduced malfunctions, false signals, sensory distortions, leadership swaps in the middle of missions. Nothing stayed predictable. She wanted them off balance, because that's where growth lived. At first, resentment resurfaced. "We're soldiers, not lab rats," one recruit muttered during a simulation. Thorne ignored it, replacing his rifle mid-run with a training knife, forcing him to adapt. He froze, then failed the task. Afterward, she gathered them, voice steady, deliberate. "The enemy doesn't announce when your gear fails. The battlefield doesn't pause because your expectations were violated. You adapt or you die." The silence that followed wasn't defiance anymore. It was reflection. One night, as the recruits collapsed onto their bunks, Calloway stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic breathing around him. The room that had once been filled with mocking jokes now held only exhaustion and thought. He turned his head toward Davenport, who lay awake on the bunk opposite. "She's changing us," Calloway murmured. Davenport didn't respond. "I mean it," Calloway continued. 3 weeks ago, you'd have punched a wall if someone told you to think before acting." Still nothing, just the slow rise and fall of Davenport's chest. Finally, his voice, quiet, raw, broke the silence. "She's changing me because she already broke me, because she saw through every wall I built." Calloway turned toward him, "And that's a bad thing." Davenport stared at the ceiling. "No, that's the part that scares me." By the second month, the transformation was visible. Their movements were cleaner, their eyes more alert. They weren't reacting anymore, they were anticipating. Thorne had forced them to live in a constant state of awareness, of adaptation. Even Blackwood noticed. During a surprise inspection, he observed from the sidelines as the recruits navigated a new exercise, a live-fire simulation with changing variables. Radios cut mid-operation. Objectives shifted. Civilians added to the scenario. Instead of chaos, there was cohesion. When one failed, another adjusted. When equipment jammed, they improvised. Afterward, Blackwood approached Thorne, his expression unreadable. "You've done something to them," he said quietly. She kept her eyes on the field. "I reminded them that survival isn't about dominance, it's about humility." He nodded. "That's a rare thing to teach." "Then let's hope it stays rare," she replied. But not all wounds healed through training. At night, when the base fell silent, Thorne would return to her quarters, the small, unadorned room tucked away near the edge of the compound. She'd sit on her bunk, staring at the folded letters she never sent, names she never said aloud. Her teammates, the ones who hadn't come home from Obsidian Shield. The ghosts never left, they never would. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the mirror, the faint scar on her jaw, the deeper one on her wrist, each one a map of a memory she couldn't forget. She thought of Davenport then, his anger, his pride, his confusion. He reminded her too much of Garrett, his father, the same stubbornness, the same courage, and the same flaw, thinking strength was armor when it was actually a cage. She whispered to the empty room, "Don't repeat his mistakes, Merrick." The silence answered back like the sea, endless, indifferent, eternal. The next morning she arrived early at the training bay. Davenport was already there, working one-handed through drills, sweat darkening his shirt. His sling was gone. "You shouldn't be here," she said. He didn't stop. "You said adaptation isn't optional." Her lips twitched faintly. "And I said it requires control, not recklessness." He paused, breathing hard. "If you're here to tell me I'm cleared or discharged, just say it." She stepped closer, studying his form. "I'm not here for either. I'm here because I wanted to see if you'd quit." He met her eyes, breathing ragged but steady. "Not a chance." "Then don't prove me wrong," she said quietly. "Prove your father wrong." He froze. The words hit harder than she intended, but sometimes pain was the only thing that made the lesson stick. She turned and walked away. Behind her, he resumed his drills, slower this time, controlled, deliberate. Not rage, not defiance, focus. Weeks bled into months. The training intensified. Thorne introduced chaos simulations, missions where every variable went wrong, weapons lost, radios dead, leaders killed mid-operation. It was brutal, but it worked. Calloway adapted first, quick thinker, calm under pressure. He'd begun to mirror Thorne's analytical style, learning to read situations faster than anyone else. Davenport followed, no longer the loudest but the most resilient. Even injured, he pushed through every obstacle. When others panicked, he steadied them. When equipment failed, he found solutions. One evening, during a simulation, Thorne deliberately sabotaged his team, a hidden timer that forced them to choose between mission success and team survival. The kind of decision she'd once faced herself. Davenport chose his men. When the simulation ended, she found him kneeling beside the dummy casualty, checking vitals that weren't real. His expression was distant, haunted. She crouched beside him. "You chose your team over the mission." He looked up, sweat glistening on his face. "You taught us the mission doesn't matter if no one survives to complete it." Her throat tightened. "Your father wouldn't have made that choice." "I know," he said. "That's why I did." For the first time she smiled, a small, genuine curve of pride. By the end of the third month, the classroom had changed completely. Gone were the jokes, the arrogance, the rivalry. What replaced it was something deeper, unity born of shared struggle. When Thorne spoke now, every recruit listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Her lectures weren't lectures anymore. They were memories disguised as lessons. "Every mistake you make here," she said one afternoon, "costs someone their life out there. Every correction you accept here saves someone you'll never meet." They took notes like scripture. And for the first time since Operation Obsidian Shield, Elaine Thorne felt something she hadn't felt in years, purpose without guilt. That night, standing alone on the pier, she watched the horizon burn orange as the sun sank into the sea. The wind tugged at her hair, the salt in the air sharp and familiar. Somewhere behind her, she heard footsteps. Davenport approached, stopping a few feet away. "Ma'am." She didn't turn. "You should be resting." "I wanted to ask something." She waited. "When you said my father couldn't adapt, did you mean he refused to?" She exhaled slowly. "No, I meant he didn't know how. None of us did. We were trained to endure, not to evolve." He nodded, staring out at the darkening water. "You talk about survival like it's a skill, but it feels more like a curse." "It's both," she said. "The trick is learning to live with what it costs." For a moment, neither spoke, just the sound of waves against the dock. Then Davenport said quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She finally turned, her face lit by the dying light. "Don't thank me yet. I'm not finished breaking you." He smiled faintly, the first genuine one she'd ever seen from him. "Yes, ma'am." That night, Elaine Thorne returned to her quarters, a quiet calm settling in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she believed the ghost she carried might finally rest, not because she'd silenced them, but because she'd taught others to listen. And as the waves crashed outside, she thought of the men she'd lost, the lessons written in scars, and the recruits now learning to survive what her team could not. Sometimes, redemption doesn't come through victory. It comes through teaching others how to avoid your fate. What happens when the test becomes too real? The base slept beneath a pale moon, but inside the command building the lights never dimmed. Monitors glowed. Radios whispered. In the war rooms of Coronado, nothing ever truly rested. Elaine Thorne stood before a bank of screens, arms folded, eyes fixed on the field. The next day would be the final assessment. the culmination of 4 months that had stripped 32 men down to their core. Commander Blackwood's voice broke the silence. "You're sure they're ready?" "No," she said, "but readiness isn't the goal, awareness is." He studied her profile, the calm mask, the controlled tone, and knew what she wasn't saying. You're never ready for chaos. You only learn to breathe inside it. Dawn rose hard and cold. A sea mist rolled over the compound, turning the obstacle field into a gray haze. The recruits waited in formation, weapons slung, faces streaked with camouflage. Every movement carried a weight of purpose. Thorne walked the line, inspecting silently. "This is not a test of strength," she said. "This is a test of mind under collapse. Expect betrayal, confusion, misdirection. Expect nothing to make sense. Your objective is to extract 2 hostages from hostile territory and return before dawn." A murmur rippled through the group. Calloway whispered to Davenport. "She said expect betrayal." Davenport's jaw set. "That means someone not coming home." The trucks rolled out minutes later, engines low, tires crunching gravel. The recruits thought it was another elaborate simulation. It was, at least that's how it began. The insertion zone was a decommissioned industrial yard 30 miles inland, rows of skeletal buildings, windows shattered, wind moaning through empty steel. Floodlights cut narrow paths through the fog. Thorne and Blackwood monitored from a command van, screens flickering with drone feeds. Team Alpha, Calloway's unit, advanced through the east corridor. Team Bravo, Davenport's, took the western flank. Communication was crisp, disciplined, exactly as trained. Then 42 minutes in, everything changed. Static hit the radios. One by one, the feeds cut to black. Blackwood frowned. "We planned signal loss for Phase 3, not now." Thorne leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "That's not us." On screen, a flash of movement, heat signatures where none should be. Too many, too precise. "Who the hell's running the secondary team?" Blackwood barked. Thorne's voice dropped. "No one." Out in the yard, Calloway froze mid-stride. "Did you see that?" A silhouette darted between buildings, fast, low, silent. Then another. Gunfire erupted, training rounds or supposed to be, but the sound was wrong, sharper, real. Davenport's radio crackled through interference. "Alpha, confirm. Are we still under sim conditions?" No reply, just static. He scanned the shadows, instincts flaring. Weapons ready, eyes up. This isn't scripted. Back at command, Blackwood was already on the phone with perimeter security. "All drills suspended. Lock down the base. I want IDs on everyone in that grid." Thorne's heartbeat didn't accelerate, but her voice hardened. "Cut the simulation. Pull them out. Extraction's 3 clicks out. We can't reach them without vehicles." She didn't wait for permission. "Then I'll go on foot." Blackwood caught her arm. "Elaine. 15 years ago I lost 7 men because I trusted the plan. Not again." He held her gaze, then released her. "You've got 20 minutes before backup." Out in the yard, chaos spread like fire. Muzzle flashes burst from upper windows. Calloway dove behind a rusted forklift, breath ragged. He checked his rifle, 1 mag left. Across the yard, Davenport's voice cut through comms. "Alpha, fall back to grid C4, regroup." He sprinted across open ground, bullets sparking against concrete, pain stabbing through his injured shoulder. The sling was gone. Adaptation had replaced limitation. When he slid beside Calloway, the younger man's eyes were wide with disbelief. "Who are they?" "I don't know," Davenport said, "but they're not blanks." Thorne reached the perimeter gate 8 minutes later. 2 guards tried to stop her. One look, they stepped aside. She moved like a shadow, sidearm holstered, mind steady. The closer she got, the louder the echoes of gunfire, the rhythm of a past she thought she'd buried. Her scars pulsed beneath her sleeve. Kandahar, Fallujah, Obsidian Shield. Every sound was a memory dragging her backward and forward at once. She found her recruits pinned behind cover, their formation fractured but alive. "Major on field," Calloway shouted. Relief flickered through the chaos. She crouched beside Davenport. "Status. Unknown hostiles. Real rounds, 2 injuries. Casualties. None yet." She scanned the rooftops, shadows where there shouldn't be. "Then we adapt," she said. Under her direction, the recruits shifted positions, drawing fire while she identified angles. "Sniper northwest corner, 2nd floor, watch for crossfire from the catwalk." Her orders came fast, precise, unshakable. In minutes, the chaos began to coalesce into control. Then a sharp crack split the air. Davenport felt heat brush his cheek, a bullet grazing metal inches from his head. Thorne saw it before he did. Without hesitation, she shoved him aside, returning fire in controlled bursts until the silhouette dropped. "Confirmed down," Calloway called out. Davenport stared at her, stunned. "You just saved my life." She didn't look at him. "Then make it mean something. Move." When the last hostile was neutralized and the silence finally settled, the recruit stood panting among the ruins. The fog thinned. Dawn pushed through. Blackwood's convoy arrived minutes later, floodlights sweeping over spent casings and shattered glass. The training yard looked like a war zone. Medics rushed in. Security secured the area. Blackwood approached, face carved from stone. "Major, explain." Thorne wiped soot from her sleeve. "Someone piggybacked our simulation. Live insurgent actors, possibly local militia." "You're telling me civilians breached a Navy perimeter?" She met his eyes. "I'm telling you it happened because they think we're predictable." Behind them, Davenport and Calloway stood at attention, bruised, exhausted, alive. "Sir," Davenport said hoarsely, "if she hadn't come in, we'd be dead." Blackwood studied Thorne. There was something unspoken between them, pride, fear, inevitability. He finally said, "We'll classify this. No press, no paperwork, just results." Then softer, "You did well." She didn't answer. She was staring at the horizon again, at the faint smear of sunlight fighting through the haze. That night, the recruits gathered silently in the mess hall. The noise that usually filled the room was gone. Just the clink of metal trays and the low hum of exhaustion. Davenport rose, arm bandaged, eyes steady. "Major Thorne," he said, voice carrying through the room, "request permission to speak freely." She looked up from her coffee. "Granted. When this started, I thought you were teaching us to think. I was wrong. You were teaching us to feel again. Fear, confusion, pain, the things we spent our lives trying to shut out." She said nothing. Davenport continued, "Today, when the real rounds started flying, I wasn't scared because I was weak. I was scared because I finally understood what you meant. Adaptation isn't strategy. It's surrender to reality." For a long time, no one moved. Then, one by one, the recruits rose from their seats, not in formation, not by order, but out of quiet respect. Thorne's gaze swept the room, emotion flickering just once behind her composure. "Sit down," she said finally. "We have work to do." They obeyed. Later, when the hall was empty, she lingered alone, coffee cold in her hands. The day had replayed in her head 100 times already. Every shout, every gunshot, every decision she'd made without thinking. Blackwood's words echoed faintly, "You did well." But she didn't feel it. Her team had survived, yes, but so had she again. And survival, she'd learned long ago, always came with a price. Outside, the sea wind howled across the base. She watched it move through the flag on the pole, restless, untamed, impossible to still. She whispered, "Sometimes control is the last illusion we let go." How do you explain survival to people who have only read about it? That was the question echoing through Elaine Thorne's head as she sat across from the investigation board. The room was windowless, gray, quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the tap of someone's pen against paper. Across the table, Commander Blackwood watched her in silence while two naval intelligence officers scrolled through after-action reports. Each click of the keyboard sounded like a verdict. Finally, the senior officer looked up. "Major Thorne," he said, "according to your statement, you intervened before backup was dispatched." "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed a direct command protocol by entering a live simulation zone." "I acted when it became clear it wasn't a simulation." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "And yet we have no confirmed hostiles. The bodies vanished before retrieval." Thorne's tone didn't change. "Then you have your answer. Whoever they were, they knew the timetable, they knew the layout, they were inside our network." A pause. The first officer leaned forward. "Major, are you implying infiltration inside Naval Special Warfare Command?" "I'm stating a fact," she said. "Predictability kills. We've built a system so rigid that an enemy doesn't need to outfight us, only outthink us." Silence thickened. Blackwood finally spoke, voice even but edged. "That's enough." She met his gaze, a silent exchange between old soldiers who'd both buried too many truths to count. The session adjourned. No reprimand, no praise, just paperwork, always paperwork. Outside, the California sun was blinding after hours in fluorescent confinement. She walked the corridor slowly, hand brushing the scar on her wrist, a subconscious gesture she never seemed to notice. At the far end, Calloway waited. "They're saying it was a glitch," he said quietly. "Training system crossfeed." "And you?" she asked. "I don't buy it." "Good," she said. "Never buy easy answers. They're the enemy's favorite weapon." In the following days, the compound shifted under invisible weight. Security doubled. Schedules changed. But the real transformation was inside the men themselves. For the first time, they had tasted the unpredictable. And it had changed them. Their drills became quieter, sharper. Communication condensed to gestures, glances, instinct. They had begun to think the way Thorne wanted, not as individuals competing for dominance, but as parts of a single mind. During night exercises, she walked among them unseen, listening. 2 o'clock movement, one whispered. Copy, adjust angle. Wait, no threat, wind pattern. Adaptation, living, breathing, reflexive. It was working. But something else was changing too. At night, alone in her quarters, the images returned. The gunfire, the smell of burning insulation, the faces of her team, the 7 men from Obsidian Shield, caught forever in the moment before everything went black. She trained herself to manage the flashbacks, deep breaths, controlled grounding, ritual silence. But since the ambush, the old ghosts had come closer. She would wake before dawn, heart hammering, throat dry, the phantom echo of a voice still ringing in her ears, "Major, we're pinned." A voice that had died 15 years ago. That morning she found herself gripping the edge of her sink, staring at her reflection. The scar along her jaw caught the light. "Still here," she whispered, "still breathing." The mirror gave no answer. Meanwhile, Davenport faced his own reckoning. Medical Corps cleared him for limited duty, but his shoulder still ached with every movement, a reminder of both failure and transformation. Yet he refused rest. When others turned in after drills, he stayed behind, rerunning every scenario she'd taught. Sensory distortion, loss of sight, cognitive overload. He practiced until the motions blurred into instinct. One night Thorne found him there, drenched in sweat, breathing hard, weapon locked on a target 40 feet away. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He didn't lower the rifle. "Can't stop hearing it." "Hearing what?" "The gunfire, the real kind, not the blanks." She stepped closer. "That never stops, you just learn to live beside it." He glanced at her, something raw in his expression. "How did you do it, after Obsidian Shield?" She hesitated. I didn't, not for a long time. I broke. Then I rebuilt the pieces that were left. That's what this program is, a blueprint for rebuilding. Davenport nodded slowly. You ever regret surviving? Her answer was almost a whisper. Every day, until you all walked into my classroom. The silence that followed was heavy, not uncomfortable but honest. Then she said, tomorrow we begin neural endurance trials. Be ready. He gave a faint smile. You never stop pushing. Neither did your father, she said softly. That's what got him killed. The neural endurance trials were unlike anything the recruits had faced. Blindfolded, deprived of sensory cues, immersed in rotating soundscapes, they were forced to complete tactical decisions under disorientation. Within minutes, strong bodies faltered while calm minds prevailed. Calloway led the first successful team through the gauntlet. Davenport followed, slower but steadier. At the end, Thorne debriefed them, voice low but resonant. What you felt was panic, the brain's rebellion against uncertainty. Most people call that fear. I call it data. The mind's warning that your perception is narrowing. Expand it and you control the chaos. She paced slowly before them. Remember this, awareness is oxygen. Lose it and the mission dies before you do. Her words sank deep. Even Blackwood, watching from the back, said nothing. That evening, Blackwood joined her on the observation deck overlooking the bay. The sunset painted the water in bronze streaks. They're ready, he said quietly. For what? For whatever comes next. Whether you planned it or not, you've built more than soldiers. You've built thinkers. She watched the horizon. That's the goal, to make myself obsolete. He gave a short laugh. You won't be obsolete, Elaine. Maybe not, she said, but they'll survive without me, that's enough. A gull cut across the sky, its cry fading into the wind. Blackwood's tone softened. You know the board's recommending closure of the cognitive program after this cycle. She turned to him slowly. Closure. They're calling the ambush a security failure. The higher-ups don't like variables they can't control. She smiled faintly, bitter, knowing. Of course they don't. He hesitated. I'll fight it. No, she said. Let them close it. The men already carry it inside them. That's all that matters. The following week, graduation orders arrived. The recruits were restless, pride and melancholy mixed in equal measure. They'd been through fire and fog together. The thought of leaving the program felt like shedding a skin. On the final morning, Thorne entered the classroom for the last scheduled lecture. She looked at the men, faces leaner, eyes sharper, postures no longer defensive but composed. She said nothing for a long moment, just studied them. Then, you've learned everything I can teach. What you do with it will decide whether my ghosts can rest. No slides, no drills, only words. Strength will fail, intelligence will falter, but awareness endures. It's not what keeps you alive, it's what makes survival worth something. Her voice cracked slightly, the first hint of emotion breaking through the iron. If you forget everything else, remember this. Adaptation isn't victory. It's forgiveness for yourself, for those who didn't come home. The silence afterward was holy. Davenport rose slowly, then saluted. Major Thorne, he said, permission to speak. She nodded. He stepped forward. You once said you owed my father a lesson. I think you paid that debt. She held his gaze. No, Davenport, you did. He lowered his hand. Then maybe we're both free. That night, long after lights out, she sat alone on the pier again. The wind carried the smell of salt and engine oil, the same scent that had clung to every deployment she'd ever known. Behind her, footsteps. Calloway's voice, leaving tomorrow. Yes. You'll come back. She smiled faintly. In the lessons, maybe that's enough. He stood beside her for a while, looking at the horizon. You know, you changed him. She nodded. He changed himself, I just gave him a mirror. Calloway glanced at her sleeve, at the faint outline of scars beneath the fabric. Those ever stop hurting? No, she said, they just stop owning you. Later in her quarters, she packed the last of her belongings, a single box. Notes, training reports, a photo of her lost team folded between pages. On top, she placed a small card, Davenport's handwriting. Adapt or die. And beneath it, smaller letters. Thank you for teaching us how to live instead. She closed the lid slowly. For a long time, she stood in the dim light, eyes closed, breathing steady. The ghosts were still there, but quieter now, as if finally satisfied. Sometimes, she thought, redemption doesn't arrive with a medal or an apology. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the breath of men who finally learned to think before they fought. What happens to a soldier when the war finally stops, but the noise does? Elaine Thorne had imagined civilian life would be simple. Quiet mornings, books, maybe a lecture hall somewhere far from the smell of gun oil and salt water. Instead, the silence screamed. 6 months had passed since she left Coronado. Her small apartment overlooked the Pacific, same ocean, different world. No reveille, no recruits, no orders. Only the hum of traffic and the occasional crash of waves against the pier. At first she tried routine. Coffee at dawn, a jog along the boardwalk, physical therapy for the shoulder that never fully healed. But every pattern felt like camouflage, a habit without a mission underneath it. She'd stare at civilians rushing to work, headphones in, laughter too light, and think, they don't know how fragile this piece really is. One morning, while watching the gulls dive for scraps near the harbor, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Still chasing ghosts, Major? She turned. Commander Blackwood stood there, older, more tired, still carrying that presence that made civilians step aside without knowing why. I don't hold rank anymore, she said. He smiled faintly. Neither do ghosts. They walked the pier in silence for a while. The sea smelled of fuel and salt, like every memory she wished she could forget. Finally he said, I didn't come for nostalgia. I figured. He handed her a sealed envelope, thin but heavy. Class Kilo 7, your last trainees, deployed to the Horn of Africa, counter-piracy and intel recovery. She didn't open it, and one of them went missing, Lieutenant Calloway. The name hit her chest like a punch. Missing. His unit was hit during a recon op. Communications went dark 48 hours ago. Search grids expanding, but command, he hesitated, dragging its feet. She stared at the waves, jaw tight. He was one of ours. I know. He learned to survive. He did, Blackwood said quietly. Because of you. But he's out there, and someone needs to understand how he thinks if we're going to find him. Her eyes met his. You're asking me back. I'm giving you a choice. That night she sat at her kitchen table, the unopened envelope before her. Outside, fog pressed against the glass. She traced a finger along the paper, imagining Calloway's calm focus, the way he'd learned to breathe through uncertainty. Then she remembered what she'd told him on the pier. I'll come back in the lessons. That's enough. But it wasn't enough anymore. When she finally tore the seal, a map fell out. Grid coordinates, last known location, a coastal village scarred by civil conflict and smuggling routes. Attached, a single photo, grainy, infrared. A figure bound to a chair in a corrugated metal hut. Not confirmed, but close enough. Her pulse steadied, the old rhythm returning, the clarity that only came when everything else fell away. By dawn, she was on a transport plane heading east. Djibouti airfield, 300 hours. The air thick with diesel and dust. She stepped onto the tarmac wearing civilian cargo gear, hair tied back, face unreadable. An operations officer met her with a clipboard. Consultant Thorne. Just Thorne. He briefed her as they walked toward a temporary command post, a half-lit tent buzzing with radios and fans. Recon Team Delta went dark 2 nights ago. Local intel suggests splinter militia activity. Satellite eyes are unreliable, cloud cover, interference. Show me their last movement. He pulled up a digital map. They were moving north along this ridge when contact was lost. Thorne studied the terrain, dense scrub, uneven elevation, choke points everywhere. Classic ambush corridor, she murmured. The officer looked uneasy. Ma'am, you're here for psychological profiling, not field ops. She gave him a look that shut him down instantly. I'm here to bring him home. 2 days later, she joined the extraction unit heading toward the coordinates. Dust spiraled around the convoy. The landscape stretched endless, cracked earth, thorn trees, heat shimmering like ghosts. Inside the lead vehicle, she studied the team, younger faces, restless energy. None of them knew her history, only her file. Civilian consultant, cognitive warfare specialist. The sergeant driving finally asked, "Ma'am, permission to ask something." "Go ahead." Why would a psychologist volunteer for this run? She watched the horizon. Because someone out there once believed my theories were worth dying for. He didn't ask again. By sunset, they reached the edge of the village, burned-out huts, sand-covered tire tracks, the smell of smoke still fresh. They moved in low and silent. At the center of the ruins stood a shack, corrugated metal, door ajar. Inside, rope fibers, blood on the floor. Davenport's voice echoed in her head, "Fear isn't weakness, it's data." She knelt, studying footprints. 3 hostiles, one carried weight, limp body, heading east. The sergeant blinked. "You got all that from?" "Dust pattern," she said. "They dragged him." He stared. "You really aren't a psychologist." "No," she said quietly. "I'm a teacher who learned too late." They followed the trail into the canyons, heat fatting, air cooling, night rising fast. Half a mile in, movement flickered across the ridge. Thorne raised a hand, signal to halt. Voices in the dark, foreign language, low laughter. She motioned left, flanking wide, moving like shadow, the precision of muscle memory she'd sworn she'd retired. At the edge of the ravine, she saw him. Calloway, tied to a post, blood dried on his forehead but alive. 2 guards nearby, rifles slung careless. She whispered into comms, 2 targets, close proximity, silent takedown. Before the sergeant could respond, she was already moving. A blur of motion, a choke, a twist, a fall. No gunfire, just silence. She cut the ropes from Calloway's wrists. His eyes fluttered open, disbelief and relief colliding. "Major." "Quiet," she whispered. "You're safe now." He tried to stand but stumbled. She caught him, the weight of him grounding her in a way no mission ever had. "Didn't think you'd come," he murmured. "I said I wouldn't," she said softly. "Turns out I lie." Extraction arrived 20 minutes later, dust, shouts, headlights slicing through darkness. By the time they reached base, Calloway was stable. Dehydrated, concussed, but alive. When Blackwood's voice crackled through the secure line, she could hear the smile he was trying to hide. "You never could stay retired." "I didn't go back," she said. "I just finished what I started." In the following days, the official reports reduced everything to bullet points. Consultant assisted in recovery of missing officer. Minimal casualties. No evidence of organized militia. But for Thorne, none of it felt simple. Because during that rescue, something had shifted the barrier between past and present, guilt and purpose. For the first time, she'd gone back into the field not to escape her ghosts, but to face them. Calloway recovered quickly. Within a week, he was walking the perimeter with a sling and a stubborn smile. "You were right," he told her one evening. "Pain teaches faster than pride." She smiled faintly. "Glad you learned that without dying." He hesitated. "What now, you going back home?" She looked toward the sunset. Homes wherever the next storm starts. He nodded. Then I hope I never see you again. She laughed softly. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all year. When she finally boarded the flight out, the desert wind followed her, hot, dry, alive. Through the window, the landscape fell away, the horizon swallowing the scars she'd left behind. In the overhead bin, a single notebook rested, her old training manual. On the first page, she'd written one new line. Lesson 1. You can leave the battlefield, but not the responsibility. She closed it gently, leaning back as the plane rose through layers of cloud. For once, the silence didn't scream. It just breathed. And for Elaine Thorne, that was enough. They told her to keep quiet. They always did, after a mission that wasn't supposed to exist. When Elaine Thorne's flight touched down at Andrews Air Force Base, the tarmac looked clean enough to eat from, an illusion of order that only Washington could perfect. Cameras waited behind the fence line, their lenses glittering like rifle scopes. Somewhere, a press officer was already rehearsing lies about routine advisory operations. She stepped off the ramp without salute or ceremony. A staffer in a suit approached, badge flashing. "Ma'am, transport's waiting. Pentagon debrief in 2 hours. I'm not active duty," she said. "Then consider this a courtesy." The courtesy turned out to be a windowless van and a silence thick enough to chew. The briefing room was bright, sterile, full of people who had never smelled burned cordite. Screens glowed with satellite stills. Every image was classified and already obsolete. At the head of the table sat Admiral Keaton, the kind of man who could make a reprimand sound like a compliment. "Major Thorne," he began, voice smooth. "Or should I say Ms. Thorne, since you're technically retired?" "Either works," she replied. He offered a rehearsed smile. "Let me start by thanking you for your initiative. The successful recovery of Lieutenant Calloway reflects great credit on our training programs." Her brow tightened. "With respect, Admiral, the program you're praising is the one you shut down." A ripple of discomfort ran through the aides. Keaton's smile didn't falter. "Which brings us to the issue at hand. There are questions about your presence in theater, the chain of command, and whether I embarrassed you," she finished. He folded his hands. "Whether your methods fall within current operational doctrine." "They don't," she said. "That's why they worked." The room went still. Blackwood, seated at the far end, hid a grin behind his hand. Keaton exhaled through his nose. "Publicly, this was a joint humanitarian mission. Off the record, you went rogue. I can bury that, but I need your cooperation." "In other words," she said, "you want silence." "I want stability, Major. The narrative keeps people calm." Her gaze held his, and calm people don't ask what failure costs. After the meeting, she found Blackwood waiting by the corridor's end, coffee in one hand, sarcasm in the other. "You never did learn politics," he said. "I learned honesty, different subject." They walked in step down the marble hall. The echo of their boots sounded wrong here, too clean, too rehearsed. He stopped by the elevator. "Keaton's not your enemy. He's the system wearing a face. The machine survives by pretending it never stalls." "And what do we survive on?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Conscience, maybe, until it eats us alive." That night, Thorne stayed in a hotel overlooking the Potomac. The city lights shimmered across the water like tracer fire, slowed to a crawl. On the television, a news anchor read a sanitized version of events. U.S. Advisory Team assists local forces in regional security operation. No casualties reported. No mention of Calloway, no mention of gunfire. No mention of the woman who'd broken protocol to bring him back. She muted the screen. The silence that followed felt heavier than combat. Her phone buzzed, a message from Calloway sent through a secure relay. "Alive, cleared for return. Calling IT training incident, thank you." She stared at the words until they blurred. Then she typed back. Adapt and move forward, that's an order. She hesitated before hitting send. Orders, she wasn't supposed to give them anymore, but some habits were marrow deep. 2 weeks later, the headlines changed. Someone leaked fragments of the after-action report. Anonymous sources, unconfirmed heroics. Suddenly the name Major Elaine Thorne was trending, half myth, half accusation. Talk shows debated whether she was a hero or a hazard. Commentators who'd never held a rifle dissected her psyche on live TV. A popular podcast called her the woman who broke the Navy's mind games wide open. She hated every word. When reporters camped outside her apartment, she slipped out the back door and walked until the city noise drowned her thoughts. Every flash of a camera made her flinch, not from fear, but from disgust. The same country that ignored the dead now wanted a story they could sell. That night she found herself standing on the Memorial Bridge, wind cutting cold across the river. She whispered to the dark water, 15 years and they still don't understand. Survival isn't glory, it's debt. Days bled into each other. Letters from former trainees arrived, short notes, gratitude folded into discipline. One from Davenport made her pause longer than she meant to. Heard about Callaway, proud doesn't cover it. You taught us right, adaptation never ends. Hope you're sleeping better, we're all still learning. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe the machine couldn't kill everything after all. Still, she knew Keaton wasn't finished. When a courier delivered a sealed non-disclosure agreement, she didn't even open it. She burned it in the sink, watching the flame curl the Navy's seal into ash. Blackwood called that evening. They'll retaliate, you know. Let them, she said. Truth doesn't need permission. You're not indestructible, Elaine. Neither is silence. He sighed. There's a hearing next month, closed session. They'll want testimony. You'll have to choose which side of the table you're on. She looked out at the city, so bright, so blind. I've been on both sides, remember. The only difference is who sleeps afterward. The hearing came sooner than expected. Behind closed doors, she faced a semicircle of uniforms and suits. No cameras this time, just cold eyes and colder questions. Major Thorne, the chairman began, do you acknowledge that your unauthorized intervention could have jeopardized a diplomatic framework? She answered evenly. No framework that ignores a soldier's life is worth preserving. Do you believe command structure should be subordinate to individual judgment? I believe judgment is what command relies on when plans collapse. One official leaned forward. You train those men to question orders. Isn't that dangerous? It's what kept them alive, she said. Minutes stretched into hours. When it ended, no verdict was announced, only the usual phrase, the record will reflect. But she could see it in their faces. They wouldn't court-martial her. They'd do something quieter, erase her, little by little, until memory itself looked like disobedience. Outside, rain slicked the marble steps. Blackwood waited under an umbrella. Well, he asked. They'll bury it, she said. He nodded. They always do. She looked up at the storm clouds, feeling the weight lift, oddly light. Good. Then maybe the truth can grow in secret. He studied her face. You're smiling. Because for once, the silence belongs to me. Weeks later, a package arrived at her apartment. No return address, just military postmark. Inside, a medal. Not new, not hers. It was a silver star, Chief Merrick Davenport, her old teammate Merrick's father. A note in Callaway's handwriting. Recovered during clearance of Obsidian Shield archives. Thought you should have it. Some debts don't die, they evolve. She held the medal in her palm until her fingers trembled. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like distant artillery. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch. That night, she wrote one final entry in her journal. The world measures victory in noise, but the ones who survive learn to live in quiet. I used to think silence was punishment. Now I know it's proof I made it home. She closed the book, set it beside the window, and watched lightning trace the horizon. Somewhere out there, her former students were scattered across deployments, carrying fragments of her lessons into battles she'd never see. That was enough, because legacies don't march or salute. They whisper, and sometimes whispering is louder than war. 3 years had passed since the hearing. She lived far from Washington now, northern Oregon coast, a weather-beaten house that faced the Pacific like a soldier standing one last watch. No rank, no duty roster, just the hiss of waves and the occasional gull crying over the cliffs. The town knew her only as Dr. Elaine. She taught night classes at a community college, decision-making under stress, cognitive resilience. The students thought she was brilliant, a little severe, maybe lonely. None of them knew she once commanded men who measured time in heartbeats. Every semester she began the same way. When the world stops making sense, breathe once, think twice, act last. No one understood it at first. They always did by the end. Some nights when rain battered the windows, the ghosts crept back, the team from Obsidian Shield, the screams over radio static, Davenport's hand slipping from hers in the smoke. But the memories didn't own her anymore. They simply sat with her, like old comrades who'd finally run out of things to prove. She'd light a candle, pour coffee instead of whiskey, and whisper, "Still here." That was enough. One autumn morning, she found a letter wedged in the mailbox, postmarked Naval Training Command. Inside was a photograph, a new class of operators standing in formation. In the back row, Calloway, older, confident, the scar on his temple faint under the sun. Below the photo, a line written in familiar, blocky handwriting. "Adaptive Warfare Program reinstated. Your doctrine, our lives. M.D. Merrick Davenport." She hadn't heard from him in years. Attached was a single ticket, invitation to the graduation ceremony at Coronado. She sat at the table for a long time, tracing the ink with her thumb. Then she packed a bag. The base looked different now, new buildings, digital ranges, but the smell of salt and diesel hadn't changed. When she stepped through the gate, young recruits passed her without recognition. That was fine. The best teachers are the ones forgotten once the lesson takes root. At the ceremony, the commander's speech blurred into background noise. She watched faces, bright, unscarred, eager, and felt the old ache of memory sharpen into pride. Then a voice behind her said quietly, "Ma'am." She turned. Merrick Davenport stood there in full dress uniform, medals catching the light, the faintest smile tugging his mouth. The anger that once defined him was gone, replaced by calm steadiness. "You kept the program alive," she said. "You started it," he replied. "We just stopped fighting it." He handed her a small patch, the new insignia of the Cognitive Warfare Division, a mind forged within a trident. She turned it over in her palm, the embroidered thread rough against her skin. "Looks official," she said. "Only on paper," he answered. "In practice, it's still what you taught us: think, adapt, survive." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind off the ocean whipped the flags into motion, and all the noise of ceremony faded into a single heartbeat of silence. "Your father would have been proud," she said. He shook his head. "He'd have argued with you first." She smiled. Then maybe he'd finally have learned something. After the ceremony, they walked along the shoreline, boots sinking into wet sand. He told her about Calloway running advanced instruction, about lower injury rates, about recruits who learned to question without hesitation. She listened, quiet pride flickering beneath the surface. When they reached the edge of the pier, Davenport stopped. "Ma'am, what are you going to do now?" She looked at the horizon, the place where the sea met cloud and memory. "Keep teaching, Not just soldiers, anyone who's still fighting something they can't name. He nodded, understanding more than words aloud. Then you're still serving. Always, she said, just without a uniform. That evening, after he left, she remained on the pier as the sun bled into the water. She took the patch from her pocket and pinned it to the inside of her jacket, not for display, but to feel its weight against her heart. The wind carried the scent of the Pacific, same as the day she first stood before a classroom full of doubting men. She closed her eyes and heard their voices again, mocking, curious, fearful, then respectful. And behind it all, the steady cadence of her own. Strength fails, awareness endures. A tear slipped down her cheek, carried away by salt and wind. Night fell, the stars came out cold, clear, countless. Somewhere far away, another class of recruits would be waking before dawn, lacing boots, checking gear, learning to breathe through fear. They'd never know her face, but they'd hear her words in the cadence of their instructors. That was legacy. Not statues, not medals. A change in how people thought when everything went wrong. She whispered to the sea. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, and keeps acting long after the noise has stopped. The camera would pull back here, her figure small against the vast dark ocean, wind tugging at her hair, the glow of a lighthouse flickering in the distance. A pause, a breath, then her voice one last time. We survive by adaptation. We heal by teaching. And if the world ever forgets that lesson, someone somewhere will remember to whisper it again. The screen fades to black.